Hey everybody. We'll wait and see, who is coming and joining us today. And my plan right now is to get started talking about some population and culture issues, and then kind of go on from there if anyone has questions. So we will, we'll wait and see how everything. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started and see if anyone joins us for tonight's live review. I am Katrina Granquist, and I'm going to be starting to talk about culture and population, and we'll kind of go on from there and see what shows up and whether or not people are, hanging out with us. So if you have questions, post them to the forum. I will keep on checking, and we'll kind of see how everything goes from there. So I want to start with talking about population today and a couple of specific issues within population. The first one is the gravity model. And the gravity model basically is dealing with the concept that you have, depending on the amount of population in an area, that area has a certain gravity. And it's basically playing off the same idea as you would have gravity on, any body in space kind of thing. Any large mass in space has a gravity, and we're just playing with that idea in terms of population. So a place like New York City is going to have a lot more gravity than a place like Spokane, Washington. And all that means is it's going to attract more interactions, more people moving there, more business, more economic endeavors are going to happen in that particular location than will happen in a place where there is fewer people, that those places will have less gravity. And that's just, this becomes really important when we start looking at things later on, like central place theory. Gravity model kind of implies some of the things behind central place theory. And so I'm going to hit on that for just a minute as well. Central place theory is basically the idea that within areas of large population, you're going to have more amenities offered. They are a central place. And in places where there are not as many people, then you have fewer amenities. And Chris Dollar developed this idea to kind of talk about the placement and number of towns of various sizes. So that's the central place model. And like I said, gravity model kind of deals with some of the underlying ideas of central place, just this idea that where you have more people, you're going to have more stuff, and more people are going to want to go into those places. I also want to talk about migration, because migration, of course, is going to play into that gravity model. And this is one of the key things you need to be able to do on the human geo exam, is you need to put multiple ideas together. You need to say, oh, okay, so when I start talking about migration, I should think about gravity model. When I start talking about migration, I should think about political issues. I should think about economic issues. And I should think about how all of those things play in together, because a lot of the FRQs are going to require you to blend these ideas together in order to answer a question. It's not going to be a question just on the demographic transition model. It will be the demographic transition model and economics. It'll be central place theory and culture, or something like that, and that's the kind of thing that you really need to be able to do when you are looking at constructing your FRQs. So migration issues. there are lots of them, and we're going to start with those within a particular country, and then we'll move on from there to international migrations. So within a particular country, you're going to have people moving for generally economic reasons, and that's actually the largest reason for migrations globally is economic. It's voluntary migrations are generally for economic reasons. And what you're going to have is people are going to move to areas where they see economic opportunities. Where can they get a job? Where can they have more opportunities in the place that they are in? So in terms of the US, one of the things we see is people are moving out of the traditional manufacturing areas, the really large urban areas, into smaller urban areas and into other areas of the country. So we've had a migration going to the area we call the Sun Belt for some time. And the Sun Belt is basically the southern half of the country stretching onward to California, the area where it is sunnier and not so snowy. And so we have people leaving the Rust Belt, the old manufacturing area where a lot of those things have moved out of the country to, or out of that area at least. Some of them have moved out of the country, so we have manufacturing being outsourced, and we also have manufacturing being put into areas with lower costs. To blend in another idea here, of course, you can think about bid rent. Bid rent being the idea of land cost and how much more it costs closer into the city center, and we can look at that idea that bid rent in an area like New York City is much higher than bid rent in an area like, say, Houston. Even though Houston's a really big city, it has much more open space and much more sprawl than does New York City, and therefore land cost there is much lower. So again, this is how you blend those ideas in together. So you're talking about migration, and you bring in the idea of bid rent and the fact that, you know, companies are leaving and people are leaving the inner cities to go to the suburbs and go to smaller cities and things like that for lower cost land. We can also think about international migration. Again, it is let me come back. Within a country, and this is not within the United States, within pretty much any country, we're going to have the largest migration stream be rural to urban. Within the US, we do see a counter stream to that, urban to suburban, not really back to rural. So they're still part of the metroplex, but they're moving out of the inner area of the city to the outer areas of the city. And this, you could, you know, throw in some nice city models here, Burgess and the Latin American city model, once we start talking about other areas of the world where people are coming in and they're settling in the outer ring of the city as the poorest inhabitants of the city. Let me see, we do have a message that has come up on our forum, so I'm going to check what that is really quick. And, oh, it's just saying that I'm on. All right. Where was I? Oh, yes, migration. So let's talk international migrations. And here we're again going to see economics being the reason. So one of the issues we see in the US, of course, is the illegal immigration coming in, especially from Latin American countries. And the bottom line of that is life here is a lot better economically often than life in the home country. So it is to the people who are attempting to come here, whether legally or illegally, the benefit of coming here is much higher than the benefit of staying where they are, even if they end up breaking the laws, even if they end up getting sent back. The chance that they won't get sent back is a much higher benefit to them than the possibility of breaking the law and getting sent back. So that's one of the things that we're going to see in terms of that kind of economic international migration. And you see the same thing in the EU with people attempting to get into the EU, that economically there are just so many more opportunities. Life is so much better there that it is worth the risk for lots of people coming in. We also can look then at political issues and the political issues surrounding migration, because if you have a lot of people from a particular area coming into a specific region or a specific part of a country, they're bringing their culture with them, and they are going to bring their views with them, including their political views. And so they can change the political tone of a country by being there, by coming in. They can change the cultural tone. They can bring their food. They can bring their religion, and all of these kinds of things are going to come in and have a pretty big impact on the area that they go into. Some people think this is cool. They say, oh, awesome. We're getting, new foods. We're getting new ideas. We're getting, all these different people coming in. And some people don't think it's so awesome. And they say, hey, they're coming in and they're changing the way things are. We liked the way things were. We wanted to keep it that way. And so you have all these issues that surround the idea of migration, that surround the political side of it and surround the economic side of it. And so migration's a really big thing. It's one of those key ideas of movement within the course and how people move around their country, around the world. And this is before we even hit on any ideas like refugees and asylum seekers and anything like that in terms of a political idea. Okay, let's go on to culture. The big thing I want to hit on with culture today is the idea of gender. And this is not something that we always think a whole lot about. So gender is not male or female. Male or female is your biological sex. So the stuff you were born with, almost everybody is born biologically male or biologically female. Gender is what culture says you should do because you are biologically male or biologically female. And this can include all kinds of stuff. To give my favorite example, it's the reason why guys can't carry purses. All right, what's a purse? It's a bag. It is a bag to throw stuff in. But we have put a cultural idea on top of this bag and said, oh, well, this bag is just for women to carry because that is somehow a woman thing. But men can carry this bag like a backpack. Men can totally carry a backpack. Men can carry a messenger bag. Men can carry, a satchel over their shoulder. They just can't carry a purse, which is also a bag you put stuff in. That is gender. That is where your culture has said this is appropriate for being male and this is appropriate for being female. So it's a cultural expectation that is put on to people. And there's a lot of things that happen in gender throughout all of the themes that we cover in this course. So I'm just going to kind of go through a few of them. So let's think population. So if your culture tells you that to be feminine is a gender word. That is saying feminine is what your culture expects of you because you are female. Masculine is what your culture expects of you because you're male. So if your culture tells you that to be a good female, to be feminine, you have to have lots of children, what is that going to mean for population? What is that going to mean for population growth? That's going to have a pretty big impact on a country's population structure. If the idea that to be feminine, you must have children and you must have lots of children, and that your ultimate worth in being feminine may be to have a particular type of child. Maybe your ultimate goal in being female is to have a male child, so you are going to continue to have children until you have a male child. That is a gender expectation that is put on people, and it becomes something that really affects the world as a whole, and it affects the country's population, their economy, et cetera, down the road, just because of this one gender expectation that says if you are feminine, you will have lots of kids. You can also put in things like within population education. In many societies, especially societies where they said being feminine meant lots of kids, then they often said being feminine meant not being educated, and being feminine meant not working outside the home, and being feminine meant whatever. And so that really affected the lifestyles of these women as well, because they were trying to meet their culture's expectations of being feminine. If we take that to culture, of course, gender is a cultural expectation, so it's going to have a huge impact on culture. We can think clothing. What are clothing styles that our culture says is okay for girls to wear, but not for guys to wear? That's gender. There's nothing biologically that says males shouldn't wear skirts. In fact, in some cultures they do. But our culture has said, this is not okay. This is not masculine. It is not masculine to wrap a piece of cloth around yourself. That's not masculine, only feminine. All right. And that is one of those things that you get into. You can also look at religion, and religion often has a huge impact on gender ideas. A lot of religions will very specifically give gender guidelines. You know, women can do this, men can do that, women cannot do this, men cannot do that. And so it has a pretty large impact on how you look at the world around you. It's going to have a pretty big impact on your lifestyle and on the way that you interact with those around you socially. It's also going to have a huge impact politically. In a number of places, it is not considered appropriate for women to really have a voice in politics. That is stepping out of the women's sphere into the male sphere. Real quick, we'll touch on spheres. The idea of a sphere is, in terms of your interactions, that this is where your appropriate interactions are. And in many cultures, the women's sphere is supposed to be the private one. It's supposed to be surrounded by the home, and it's supposed to be centered on the family, whether that's an extended family or a nuclear family. And it is supposed to not be part of the public sphere, which was the male sphere. And the public sphere included business, politics, trade, all of those kinds of things. So you can see that if you have an idea that the woman's sphere is private, all of the things she's going to be left out of, economics, politics, etc., still have a huge impact on her, but she does not have a voice in them because of the gender expectations within her particular country. We are seeing that change in many places. One of the things we're seeing in a lot of places is, of course, the focus on the education of girls as a means of bringing down population growth. That is, in fact, I think a number of population tracking societies around the world have indicated that that is the biggest factor in bringing down population growth, is educating girls, because then they will put off having children later, and they will likely have fewer children than they would have had originally. If we take this then from politics and we go into agriculture, gender has a really big role in agriculture as well. We know our first farmers were women. They were the very first ones to figure out, because they were the gatherers. You know, our hunting and gathering societies did have different gender roles. Men hunted, women gathered. And part of this was probably dealing with biological issues, because it's easier when you're carrying children around to not have to chase after wild game and try to kill them. So that's probably a lot of where that came from. And women gathered, and they found plants they liked. Oh, I really like this berry bush, so I'm going to tend this berry bush. And so women start tending the plants that they like. They pull the weeds from around them. They may give them some more water. They may, you know, do whatever, take down other plants that are near them so that plant has more room to grow. And eventually that plant tending turns into plant domestication. So women are our first farmers. And then when we move into the Neolithic Revolution, we see that farming and the ownership of the land then becomes a male activity, a masculine activity, and not a feminine activity. So today, globally, women, there are still lots and lots of women farmers. Unfortunately, most of them don't actually own the land they farm on. And what that means is that when development projects come into an area and they want to help, you know, we want to build a well, we want to do this, that, or the other, they talk to the land owners. And those landowners are usually male, even though the people working the farm are usually female. And so they don't necessarily have a voice in the things that are happening with their particular plot of land. And they may not be receiving the same benefits. Again, that is kind of a gender disparity in terms of things. Economically, we can take gender through that. And we're going to really look at what does a culture say is okay for a woman to do? And are there barriers in place that prevent a particular group from rising or doing what they want to do. So if we think about in the United States, there are gender expectations for particular professions. We tend to assume that nurses will be female. We tend to assume that people who take care of young children will be female. Sorry, my cat is over there making a lot of noise. We tend to assume that hairdressers will be female and things like that. And so if a man wants to enter that profession and they have a real talent for it, there are some gender barriers that that person has to overcome. We also have ideas like the glass ceiling, like how far can a woman rise within business before gender expectations start to work against her. The whole lean in kind of thing that was a big deal a little while ago about, why women aren't doing well at the upper levels of business and what they need to do to get there. We can take this out of economics or take it out of national economics and look at global ones. And we see that in lots of areas of the world, we have women not really being encouraged to work outside of the home. So that means for those countries where that doesn't happen, they have half of their possible workforce not engaged in an activity that is productive economically. It is still productive for their family. They're taking care of their families, but in terms of earning money or earning, being part of the GDP and things like that, their jobs are not counted. A woman who takes care of her own children does not get counted as a person earning a salary to take care of children. And so they aren't counted the same way economically. And so that can sometimes leave them out of decision-making in terms of that. In urbanization, and there's been a lot of things. You may have seen some of the videos, the one walking through New York for 10 hours and the way people interacted with her. You may have seen, a number of things went through Twitter lately about, men are doing this, women are doing this, and that kind of thing. But what we do want to think about is there is gendered space. There are spaces where one gender is allowed to thrive, for lack of a better word, than the other gender is. And this isn't just a one-way street. It's not that, men always thrive and women don't. We do see that public spaces tend to be more male-friendly. That there are certain behaviors that men can engage in public that women can't, like a man who approaches a woman he doesn't know on the street, that is considered okay masculine behavior a lot of the time, but a woman who did the same thing would be considered to be behaving in an unfeminine way. We can look at, the difference in gendered spaces in more private circumstances in terms of like different shops which cater to particular genders. Bath and Body Works definitely caters to females. We can look at, the Bass Pro Shop caters a lot more to men, that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of issues that gender becomes this kind of thread that you can pull through pretty much every single unit that we cover. I'm not seeing any questions online yet here, guys. So if you have questions, please let us know. Or I'm just going to keep talking about stuff and hopefully it's useful to you. Let's see. Next thing I wanted to cover was ethnicity, which is another kind of identifying factor. And with ethnicity, we really want to differentiate it from race. That's kind of the big thing that we want to make sure we are not talking about when we talk about ethnicity. So let's start with what is race. Race is purely biological. It is dividing people based on external appearance. You have this skin color, you go with this group. You have this skin color, you go with this group. You have this kind of hair, you go over here. You have this kind of hair, you go over there. That's all that race is. It is dividing people based on outside appearance into various categories, and then often making assumptions about those groups, often stereotypical assumptions that can be fairly damaging to the group as a whole. So that's where we're talking about race. Ethnicity is more than that. So ethnicity says, yeah, there may be a biological component to this, but what we're really concerned with is culture, culture and shared history. So well, I'll use myself as an example here. So, you know, I am part of the US, all right? I'm a citizen of the United States. So I am part of an overall culture group that is, you know, American citizens. But that is not a term that we use a lot culturally, because we know there's a lot of variety in culture within the United States. So then we might break it down. And when we start breaking it down in terms of what you might call heritage, that's when we're getting more into ethnicity. So my ancestry is mainly Northern European, both Scandinavian and kind of British Isles stuff, and a little bit of French thrown in. And so the question is, what do those things do for me in terms of my ethnicity? What kind of culture group am I part of because of my heritage? And in great truth, my family didn't really follow that a whole lot. I mean, yes, we ate a few foods that were, you know, Norwegian in tradition. We, you know, can't really think of even much that we did from the French side of the family or anything like that. You know, so in terms of heritage, we didn't really do a whole lot. So then I say, okay, so then what kind of ethnicity am I part of? Is it based on the region of the world that I live in, or the region of the country that I live in, or the region of the country I grew up in, because I moved around quite a bit? Is it based on you know, my profession? Do I find my culture group through my profession? And so this is where we get into kind of those interesting questions. Now, in other situations, your ethnicity may be a lot more clear cut because you grew up in a people that continued practicing the same culture over time. And you said, okay, so if I am you know, if I grew up on a Native American reservation and I grew up within a group of people who all shared the same history, all of these people shared the same history and they share the same culture. And that is a much clearer ethnic group that we can talk about. And of course, the different various Native American groups are going to have different cultures. They may have a lot of heritage in common in terms of the way they were treated by the US government. And so there may be a lot in there that they share as commonalities, but there are also going to be differences. If we look at an Irish person who currently lives in Ireland, then their Irish ethnicity, their sharing of the same culture, their sharing of the same history is going to be much more pronounced than me, who has a little Irish in my background. And we can even look at, you know, people who are Irish American in the United States, and they may really cling to that as part of their identity. And so that may have a much larger impact on them than it does for someone like me. So there are a variety of ways that we can look at ethnicity. Ethnicity can be created, and it can be created by external groups. This is one of the things we saw in Rwanda, where the Hutus and Tutsis weren't really separate groups until the Belgians got there and started making them separate groups. And they treated the two groups differently, and they defined them differently based on wealth and height. And therefore, you know, said, oh, well, this group over here are the Hutus, and this group over here are the Tutsis, and we're going to treat the Tutsis better and the Hutus worse, and that's going to help us control the area. But then when the Belgians leave, they had created ethnicities and then created animosity between those ethnicities and led directly to the Rwandan genocide. So ethnicity can be a very powerful force for the good, but it can also be a very powerful negative force when it is used to divide people. A quick thing here, when we talk about ethnic conflict, the conflict is not because the groups are different ethnicities. Even between the Hutus and Tutsis, the conflict was not over the ethnicity or over differences in ethnicities. The conflict is over power, economic or political power, who has it and who wants it. So when we talk about ethnic conflicts, all ethnicity does is says who's on which side. That's it. So therefore, when we get into that idea, we need to keep that very clearly in mind, that ethnicity does not cause the conflict. We see all over the world people of different ethnicities living together peacefully. They may not always agree with each other. They may have different values. They may have different ideas about the best way to do things, but just being different ethnicities living together does not cause war. When you have a power imbalance, that's where the conflict happens, because this group wants to hold on to the power and this group wants the power. And so that's where you're going to start having the fights. That's where the conflict will happen. And that conflict or that power imbalance can either be economic or political. So that's just one of those things we really want to keep in mind. Still no other questions on there. So I guess that I'm going to just go on and start talking about some other things. Again, if there's something that you want us to go over in this particular topic, then just let us know so that we can make sure that we are covering it. Let's see. What's another big thing that we want to talk about? Let's talk about nations and states, because we're going to have our politics going up here very quickly. And so that's always a good thing to kind of clear up. The problem, of course, is for us in the US, we use state to mean something different than geographers use state to mean. So when the United States was formed, when our first 13 colonies came together and created a country, they did so as kind of independent countries, because when they got their independence from Britain, each one saw itself as being its own little independent thing. And so we have these different countries coming together as united. They were the United States that came together and created, at that time, a loose confederation where each of them had more power than the central government did. And we know that didn't last very long, and that, the Articles of Confederation were thrown out and we get the Constitution. But that's where our definition of state comes from. So state is a country, and that's where the name of our country came from. And then we just kind of kept calling all of the subsections of the country states, even though most of them did not come into the country as an independent state. They came in as provinces or territories or something like that. So technically, we should be the United Provinces of America. That's what we have. We have provinces, we have subsections of the United Subsections of America or something like that. But we use states because the original 13 came in as states. So a state, according to a geographic definition, which is what we want you using, of course, at this point, a state is an independent sovereign unit that is recognized internationally. Sovereign, of course, is referring to sovereignty, having power and autonomy over their own territory. So you can't be a state if someone else controls your territory. That's a problem. Or you can be, you can claim it and say that you are the, the rightful state, but your recognition in the international community may not be clear. A nation, on the other hand, is a group of people. It is a group of people who share a culture and who often have some claim or some historical tie to a piece of territory. And this then, you could have, in the ideal, when we first start seeing things created with things like the Peace of Westphalia, we have this ideal of a nation state, that the territory of the nation and the territory of the state should coincide, because then the nation would be making their own decisions for themselves and everybody would be happier and you would have less war. Of course, we know that today there aren't a lot of true nation states left. In fact, most states are not nation states because of migration, again. We therefore have a lot of different ethnicities, different nations living within states. States have grown and expanded to the point that they encompass the territories of multiple nations, or you might have a nation that its territory was split up between other countries. And so we start getting a lot of other ways of combining those words besides nation state. So we can have a multi-state nation, which is our nation whose territory is divided up among other countries. We could have a multinational state, And a multinational state is one which encompasses numerous nations and their territories. We could have a stateless nation, which is a nation who does not really have a state which speaks for it. Perhaps it was divided up between multiple states, or perhaps it is a minority group within a particular state and is therefore not allowed political expression. But there's a variety of ways you can be a stateless nation. We hear about the Kurds a lot and their desire to form their own country. They are a multi-state nation where their territory has been divided between various other countries. And so trying to create a state out of that nation is going to be difficult, and it's going to require a lot of countries being willing to give up large amounts of territory, which doesn't usually happen. When we look at our state system today, one of the interesting things we see is that most of the world is claimed by one state or another. In fact, we have multiple areas of the world that are claimed by multiple states. And this can be border areas or something like that between states, or it can be something like Antarctica, where we have numerous states having a claim to it, but none of them deciding to act upon those claims because of a treaty. So there is really no unclaimed land left in the world. And so there's no place for someone to go to start a new country. They can't go say, oh, I'm going to start my new country over here because it's claimed by somebody else. And that would basically lead to war. One of the things that implies is that all land is equally under control, and that's not necessarily true. We do see a lot of areas where states have very limited control over a particular territory, and we often call those, if they are between states, we'll call those frontiers, that their border is not really a hard and fast border where my power as a state goes all the way up to the line and I'm great, but it's more kind of a fuzzy zone, and so they may have less and less control as they get closer to the outskirts of the country or away from the capital city or something like that. This is then going to create areas where terrorism and terrorist groups can operate more freely, because if the central government doesn't have a huge amount of control over that particular zone, then who does? And you may see local groups claiming control and being the basically law enforcers, and they may determine their own laws, which may or may not reflect the laws of the central government. Or it may be something along the lines of a foreign group coming in, or a terrorist group, or a warlord or something like that, who is able to establish control over a particular zone, and through basically might of arms, the fact that they have more firepower or more people who are willing to fight for them, and they are able to establish that control. And this can cause a number of problems for a country. If they are able to reestablish their control, or are they going to basically cede control of that area to that local group? And this gets us into a couple of other concepts. First, we want to talk about centripetal forces and centrifugal forces. So our centripetal forces are those forces that bring a country together. So in this, we can think of highway systems that allow you to travel from one side of the country to the other, communication systems that allow everyone to talk to each other or to see each other, that kind of thing. Those are all things, a common language, a common religion. Those are all things that bring a country together and make it more unified. Centrifugal forces, on the other hand, are going to be those that drive a country apart. And so if you have, 30 different languages spoken in your country and nobody speaks each other's language, that is, of course, going to be something that drives a country apart. That's where something like a lingua franca or an official language might get really important. If you don't have that kind of transportation system that really links the country, or a communication system that really links the country, that is going to drive it apart. And if you have that kind of sectionalism or regionalism where the central government really doesn't control a local area, but instead a a local group controls it, they may actually decide then, hey, why are we paying taxes or listening to the central government at all? We're doing all the work here. We control the area. Why shouldn't we, become our own country, which can, of course, lead to devolution. Devolution is a country basically coming apart, the things that drive the country apart. And here we often see this is going to be in multinational states, states with numerous nations within them and that each have their own defined territories, you're going to see that desire for devolution often come up. Our opposite term from devolution, of course, is supranationalism. And supranationalism is the idea of states joining together. And so you're going to see then the creation of multi-state organizations. So this can be NATO or the United Nations or the European Union, but basically states coming together to accomplish something. And that's something that they accomplish could be as simple as, ensuring more trade or to, patrol a certain waterway or something like that. Or it could be much more complex where we see like in the European Union, where they've lowered migration barriers, they have the same currency, they have an overall government which is able to tell some of the member governments how to do things. And we see in large part, we're going to see states have to give up some of their own sovereignty, some of that own autonomy they have, because if I'm in the European Union and I am joining into the currency that they have there, then I'm going to be saying, okay, so I'm not going to have my own currency anymore. I'm not going to have control over my own currency. Instead, I am going to, I'm going to take those ideas and give them to this overarching, organization in order for them to make the decisions. And so I give up some of my autonomy and some of my sovereignty to allow that to happen. All right, still no questions on the forum. If you're putting your questions in the group chat, I can't see those, but if you put them in the forum, I can. So that's just an FYI. I probably should have said that at the very beginning. I don't know if any of you are putting them into the group chat, but just to let you know, I can't see anything there. I can see them if you put them on the forum though. So let's see, where was I? Supranationalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where do we want to go from there? Let's talk Ratzel's biological state model. And this is basically just the idea that the state needs to grow in order to survive. And it was used as justification basically by a whole bunch of people who want to conquer the areas around them. But it's, the state grows, they have to develop internally before they can grow externally, and they grow by absorbing smaller units around them, and that's how the state grows. And this, of course, is something that is going to lead to multinational states, because if you take over other people's territories, then of course those nations are going to be within you, and that can create some problem. It can also lead to things, or it can also be involved in ideas like irredentism. And irredentism is when you have a nation whose territory is larger than the state. And in that territory, which is larger than the state, therefore the state says, oh, I should grow so that I encompass the whole territory of the nation, and that will make things better for me. All right, so that's irredentism. We did have a question about the demographic transition model. I want to really quick bring up an image of that, because that's going to make it a lot easier to explain. So give me one moment to bring up demographic transition. Here we go. Okay, so let me look at my little things here so I can share what I'm looking at with you. Okay. One moment. Sorry, waiting for my PowerPoint to come up, and I will go over the demographic transition. Here we go. Oh, okay. Okay, so let's bring this down like that. All right, try the screen share thing again. Okay. All right, so here we have the demographic transition model. All right, I want that to go away so we can just see this. All right, make that a little bigger. Okay, so basically this is your standard demographic transition model with 4 stages. So in stage 1, we have high birth rates and high death rates. This therefore keeps population fairly low. So here's our death rates here, and it's gonna fall. Here's our birth rates, doesn't fall till there. And here's our population. So here our population stays fairly stable and fairly small for quite a while. At the second stage, and what we're looking at here is kind of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the early 1700s, because the demographic transition model was developed specifically on the experiences of Europe. And so that's kind of its thing. It's looking at that. And so we're looking at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution here. Incidentally, this is also where Malthus is writing. So when Malthus is getting all crazy about population growing so much, it's because he's writing at the beginning here, and what he's seeing is this huge population growth at the beginning of our demographic transition bubble. So death rate starts falling, and it starts falling for 2 main reasons. First of all, food. They have more food. They're producing more food because of new techniques in agriculture. And secondly, because of the Industrial and Revolution and the Enlightenment, we are seeing better practices in terms of sanitation and medicine, so people are surviving longer. As a note, when you look at average life expectancy and you see an average life expectancy of, say, 40, that does not mean that when people reach age 40, they all start dying. What that means is that country has a very high infant mortality and child mortality rate, and so people die very young. The people who survive to 40 are likely going to survive to 60 or greater. But so many people are dying so young, so many babies and children die, that's what brings down the life expectancy. It has nothing to do with reaching age 60 and everybody falling over. All right, so just keep that in mind when you see average life expectancies. So what's here, and the big thing that we're seeing happen here, is kids are living longer and people are surviving illnesses that they didn't survive earlier. So our death rate falls, and it continues to fall through basically the 3rd stage, and then starts to level off. But it takes people a while for to have less children, because the reason why our birth rate is so high here is because people didn't expect the kids to survive. So they also didn't have a lot of birth control, but even without that, they didn't expect the kids to survive. So with high infant mortality and child mortality rates, you tend to have much higher birth rates. And so it takes a while for people to start saying, hey, more kids are surviving, so we don't need to have as many. The other thing that happens in this region here is that people are moving into cities at very rapid rates. And in the city, it's not as good to have as many kids as it is in the country. So if you live in the country and you are a farmer, the more kids you have means the more people you have to work on your farm. You live in the city, the more kids you have, the more costs you have. So that's kind of a, sorry, apparently I may not have been sharing this with everybody. So if I was not sharing this, I apologize. Sorry, just checking the forum. Let me come back. All right. Everyone can see this now. I hope you can. So our, what I was pointing here is the birth rate starts to fall because people realize, oh, I live in the city and having more kids is more expensive. And also I don't need to have as many kids because they're more likely to live. And so our birth rate starts to fall. And then around stage 4, it is going to be right around the death rate again, and we're going to have a stable population again. The problem, of course, is this, and what happens to our population from here to here. And population, because of this bubble where our birth rate is much higher than our death rate, we have huge population growth, and this is what Malthus gets all freaked out about. And so our huge population growth goes on, and so while we have a stable population, again here, we have instead, we have a stable high population as opposed to a stable low population. So if you are talking about the different stages, you want to say first stage is pretty stable but low. Fourth stage is pretty stable but really high. And this is going to lead to things like population momentum, because we have a lot more people here who are having kids. So even if they don't have as many, let's say, you know, people over here are having 3 kids each and people over here are having 2 kids each, there's still going to be a lot more kids born here than here because you have so many more people having the kids. That's population momentum. All right, here's just another look at it. One of the critiques of the demographic transition model, of course, is the fact that it's based purely on the experiences of Europe and the United States in terms of their population growth. So how accurate is it when we start looking at countries which went through industrialism and urbanization in a different way? So one of the things we are seeing is that stage 2 for some places is lasting longer, and stage 3, because, you know, in places which are going through industrialism right now, stage 2 is lasting longer, and stage 3 happens more rapidly. So that's one of the interesting things that we can look at. Here we're seeing stage 5. Not all your normal standard model is 4 stages. We are starting to see a lot of them done with 5 stages because we are seeing in many countries the change in population structure when they get past this stationary, that we are seeing instead a declining population. And so we are going to see this point where the death rate is actually higher than the birth rate. And so the people are having fewer and fewer kids, in large part because they do live in urbanized societies where it is more expensive to have kids. And therefore, we are going to see in many areas a declining population. And the question is, what happens then? When you have a declining population, there are a number of problems that you can go into because of economics. If you have a very elderly population, and this is where you want to also start looking at, let me see if I have it here. Yes. When you start looking at a population pyramid, for example, and let's see, do I have, no, okay. We can look at it with this China one. All right, so this Chinese population pyramid, we know China had, of course, its one-child policy and that they have done some very strict things to bring down their population. The problem is going to be what happens when this cohort right here is up here, all right? And they have they don't have nearly as many people down here as they have up here. And that's where you start getting problems in terms of dependency ratios. And so your dependency ratio is the number of people who are either above 65 or below 15. And if you have a whole lot more people in those zones than you have in the working population, that can be a big problem. And we're seeing that in places like Japan, where they have, you know, a very large elderly cohort within their population because of declining birth rates, but they don't have the same, they don't have the same number of people going into the workforce as are leaving it. And so you are kind of creating a top-heavy population structure, which can cause some economic problems for a country down the road. Real quick, when you're looking at population pyramids like this, you do want to be able to identify, okay, what are the things that happen in here? What are the issues that we're looking at? Why does the population pyramid look the way that it does? If it is skewed more toward one gender or the other, if there are places where obviously, you know, there was lower population for some time, that would be something to pay attention to. And so those are the kinds of things that you want to really look at. Like, you know, here we can definitely see an impact of the one-child policy with many fewer girls than we have boys. we see a little bit more out here where it's growing a little bit more, where we can see the relaxation of the one-child policy, which is currently going on. And so those are things you want to look at population pyramids and be able to identify the things that are going on. This, of course, is a very rapid growth population. It's starting to, you know, level off here at the bottom. So I would say this is probably a stage 2 country that is looking at entering stage 3 in a little while. There really aren't a lot of, I don't think there's any countries that, unless it's in war, you're not going to have any countries that are still in stage 1. So some place that is really impacted by war or civil war, they may still be in stage 1. Pretty much everyone else is at least going to be in stage 2, because we have seen increases in food and medical practices and sanitation. All right, and then there's a number of places that are kind of on the cusp of 3. Most of our industrialized countries are going to be here in 4, with a few over here in 5, actually with declining population. So that's just kind of where they all are. So this brings us into, of course, our population policies. Countries where they want you to have more kids are going to have pro-natalist policies. Pro-birth. Natal means birth. So pro-natalist policies, like this is a Russian one. You can see they are promoting this woman who has 3 kids here. Yay, great mom. We can throw back our gender ideas here. Look, isn't it great for her to have 3 kids? That makes her a great woman. All right, versus this one over here, where they are saying, please don't have more kids. They are an anti-natalist policy. They are telling people to have fewer children, and we get, you know, our strictest anti-natalist policy currently is China, but there are a lot of countries that, you know, strongly encourage fewer children because of the problems. Because you can also have, like we saw with Bangladesh, in terms of dependency ratio, having too many people down here at this end of the dependency ratio spectrum is just as hard for a country to deal with as having too many people up here. You really kind of want your population to look more like kind of a modified rectangle. That's kind of best overall for, you know, the economics of the country. But it's hard to get something to look like that. This also shows, I mean, look at Bangladesh's fertility rate here. Look at how far it's dropped. But they're still going outward because of population momentum, because more people are having kids. And so even though they're having fewer kids now than they were back here, we are still seeing so many more of them are having the kids that that's going to have a huge impact. All right, so we have time for probably one more quick question if somebody has it, because we're going to stop this at 6:15. So if you have one more question you want me to address, then go ahead and throw it on the forum. If we don't, you know, if you all throw up questions right now, I may or may not get to them all, but I can certainly do them in writing if I can't get to them on the forum itself. So it's up to you. Let's see. Hey, everybody. Here I am again. I closed out the PowerPoint. So you can, and I guess kind of the big theme for you guys to take away from this one is just how much everything is interrelated. You know, look at how population issues impact political issues, impact economic issues, impact cultural issues, and so on, and how cultural issues impact all of those things. Because that's the key of this course. Although we divide things into units, it's really that everything builds on each other and everything has a huge impact on each other. And that's what they really want you to focus on in your FRQs. They want you to see those thematic links and see those informational links between the different topics, so that you are able to then, you know, bring everything together in a lovely synthesis and have that kind of idea. All right, no other questions got put up. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. Mr. C will be doing another broadcast Wednesday night at 8 Central Time. So you can certainly ask him questions then. We'll be doing another one on Saturday. And hopefully we're helping you all get ready for the exam and earning those 5s. So take care and have a good night. Bye-bye.